The first question, unless I see a hand up here, is going to be one for Hannah, and it would be about how the grid emissions factors in Finland compare to BC.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, though I noticed somebody else did put some numbers in the chat, so I understand that that would make the results not necessarily comparable, but I think the important lesson to draw is the importance of doing that type of analysis. So we need to do that analysis for a lot of different contexts, and that study was really the only one that I could find that had taken that perspective.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, I assume the emissions factors for gas would have been consistent, so it would apply for certainly half of our building stock. The next in the list would be for Benjamin, and that would be to allow the adaptive reuse process laid out to occur. What kind of BIM LOD would you be looking for? So for anyone that isn't aware, kind of LOD is 350 is the stage of kind of construction documents, so an IFC drawing set. 500 would be basically an as-built Revit model.
Yeah, and thank you for the clarification, Jeremy. And I will say this is a very interesting question, and it has been part of my research. And the answer depends on the scope of the adaptive reuse project. The level of intervention for the adaptive reuse can be at a room space level, let's say in that way, or at a component level. All the figures that I presented to you was at a component level. With this in mind, we can say that for a room space level, a level of detail of 300 is enough. Then for a component level, without the need of the reuse of components, the level of detail could be up to 350. And finally, if the reuse of the disassembled components are part of the scope of the project, then we need the highest level of detail, that is 500. So, yep.
Excellent, thanks. A comment from Judith was basically loving the use of the cloud for sharing the data. A question from Veronica, will the reading list slides be shared? Anthony, I think yes, right?
Well, we haven't asked the speakers yet, but if the speakers permit use of slides, we typically link it to the bottom of the YouTube video when we upload it. So then in the description of the YouTube video, you'll be able to download it there.
Excellent. So we will follow up with everyone, each of the speakers offline, and everything with permission will be posted. The next question is Will. Will, would you like to ask it?
Sure, yeah. So obviously the City of Vancouver's embodies carbon reduction, 40% is on a per square foot or per square meter metric. So it's an efficiency metric, but we know that probably it's going to not be effective in limiting overall embodied carbon. So I guess I wanted to ask the speakers their opinion about having absolute carbon budgets for city planners and whether that might be a viable strategy to try to incentivize what we need to see in the from developers.
Yeah. Could I respond to that, please, Anthony?
Yes, please go ahead. Any speakers, just jump in on any questions.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Will. You've mentioned this to me before, and I totally agree. Because in our research, we also found that embodied carbon benchmarks are per square foot or per square meter, but it doesn't curtail building size. So you can still build, a huge building, and provided per square foot, it's efficient. It doesn't curtail the amount of building, like I was trying to say. So yes, absolute carbon budgets are certainly required. And there actually is work going on in Europe, especially in the Nordic. There's a researcher called Martin Rock, R-O-C-K, and others, and they're taking a top-down approach. So from a city carbon allocation, they can actually devise a sector allocation for buildings, and they can even come down to a building types of buildings. So, so your question is very important, and also we're looking at with our research. So the metric needs looking at. So rather than just per square meter, it needs to be based on occupancy. How can you house the occupants more efficiently, or other ways of building less? So I think I've said enough, but that's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I just like to weigh in too and strongly second that I think, yes, we need to look at carbon budgets and carbon per capita if we want to be serious about this, but I also know it's going to be incredibly hard. So in this research process, when I discussed looking at the embodied carbon of an entire city or region with a regional planner, he just did. So, you know, it's a tall order, but I think we have to start thinking along those lines.
Excellent. Thanks, Hannah. The next question is from Stephanie.
Hi, thank you. So great content in this webinar. I'm really glad I was able to attend. And I was really wondering about tools and training that exist for structural engineers. And maybe Benjamin, you might be able to speak more to this, but of course, if all the speakers can jump in. And the reason I asked for that is there's a lot of interest in zero carbon design, and I see it as a strategy to think about that beyond the building life cycle and think about reuse and recovery of materials. But when I put it out there at the very early stages of a project to design for disassembly, there is interest from the engineers, but there's a lot of kind of just wondering, like, how do we actually go about doing this? And so when we think about the smart sensors and the RFIDs and all of these things, how does that all get spec'd? How does that get captured in our drawings? That's just kind of all of it. And I was kind of wanted to put it out there.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Stephanie, because you know, you are speaking about the practical part of all these ideas that in the paper sounds very romantic, let's say, in that way. And the thing is that, yeah, your assumptions are correct, Stephanie. And after doing my investigations, all these have field related with planning for disassembly and designing for disassembly from the beginning is completely underdeveloped and underused in comparison even to other industries. If we just take a look to the manufacturing industry, I mean, for me, I can tell you guys that it's just amazing the amount of tools, technologies that they have developed in order to implement all these technologies in real products and in the industry. That is the most important part. So that this for me is interesting because that gives us, to all of us that are interested in this field, a lot of field to work, to propose, to create from the beginning and from now. And of course, I will wish that this could be developed so much more from now. But the real thing is, no, right now we are just in the first steps. But I have, because all these pressures all these objectives for sustainability in the construction, it's my feeling that the developments are gonna increase so much more from now. And also, if we put into the picture the role of the new technologies that are coming into the construction industry, that I am completely sure that from now in the next 10 years are gonna play a fundamental role and are gonna make all these ideas to be implemented in a more efficient way. So that's my feeling, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Awesome. Anthony, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Is it a question or is it
no, a question? Yeah.
Okay. Can I? Yes.
Oh yeah. Ask them.
Please go ahead.
Okay, sure.
Will's got one in.
So I think when we're talking about circular economy, like there's obviously a certain subset of strategies that we can deal with, like in the new buildings that we're designing, and how do we ensure at the end of the lifespan we can, disassemble it or deconstruct it, and how do we, set up our BIM models? How do we kind of design it for deconstruction, right? And then there's also, and sometimes, like for instance, in Vancouver, we have a lot of rezoning projects, right? So projects where we're demolishing a certain component, like the existing building, and we're building maybe denser buildings or whatnot, right? And so I'm also curious, like from a circular economy perspective, how we actually tackle the current like demolition of existing buildings where we don't have these great, BIM models and everything. And are there things that maybe we should implement from the city perspective or from the policy perspective of like, how do we actually address that? And maybe we need to be more material specific, or like, where's the low hanging fruit on like taking whatever is current practice for construction and demolition, maybe on an individual material basis, and then figuring out, okay, like how can we actually improve that? If the default is to recycle, how do we reuse that? Or if it's not to landfill, how do we recycle that? Like, how do we, so I'm just kind of curious if any of the speakers have any thoughts on what we can do with that existing building stock that we're demolishing now.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a shift to deconstruction in the residential sector and mostly in terms of detached homes, but it's gotten a lot of momentum in Vancouver within builders, as I mentioned, and the Rebuild Hub. But I was just on a meeting with them earlier this morning, and they're very aware that there's still this major problem of scale, and it also has not really infiltrated the commercial and industrial sectors. So, I mean, one of the major issues is the space needed to warehouse materials, and also getting demolition contractors into doing deconstruction. So there's a whole training component, and probably incentivizing deconstruction and introducing more regulations, as Vancouver and other cities have done in the single family housing sector.
Thanks.
Okay, and we're at 1:28, so I think this may be the last question, if that the speakers are required to stay for. After this, if there's extra time, it'd be great, but Will, if you could please ask your question.
Well, it was a simple technical question for David, but those sensors that you were putting in with that Arup project, were they able to track any sort of material history to that end where, for reuse, we need to understand the structural integrity of what's being reused?
Yes, good question again. Yes, we were able to track the physical properties and the size and location and that kind of thing. But so far, we haven't been able to, like you mentioned, the structural strength. But there are ways of combining sensors with what we've developed. So that would be the next step, to have like thermal sensors or structural sensors. And I know in infrastructure, there are sensors used on bridges, real-time sensors to assess their strength. So yeah, that's the next step. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Will. With that, we are at 1:30. So this will be the end of the formal scheduled event. So if anyone has another commitment, now is the time that you're free to take on. We will stay probably for another few minutes because I do see that there's a couple more questions. Alternately, we can send those questions along to the speakers and kind of take that after the event. So with that, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great afternoon.